Hi, Jeremy Crow here. Welcome to episode 3 of the Esoteric Insomniac's live stream. It's 3:20 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or is it Eastern Daylight Savings Time? I'm not sure. They should probably get rid of that whole thing. I heard that in British Columbia, they're going to be getting rid of it. I think in Alberta, they've already gotten rid of it, like ages ago, or maybe they never had it, but it's so disruptive and annoying. And a lot of people don't like it. But, anyways, it's past 3 a.m. in the middle of the night here. Some people say that this is the witching hour. So it's quite appropriate that we have a chat about esoteric subjects here on this live stream. Looks like I don't have anybody joining me yet, but I do have some things that I wanted to ramble on about, so I might as well just ramble on. I've been thinking a lot about this new era that we're in, the new illuminated era, the new Luciferian era. We are in, what is it, year 6, I believe, of the new Luciferian era, as I've personally defined it, at least. It began December 21st, the winter solstice of the year 2012 Common Era, which is the end of the Mayan long count calendar. It's the end, according to them, it would have been the end of a great year, you could say. So you have these. Most people are familiar in the esoteric community of the zodiacal ages. So you have, like, you've probably heard of the Age of Aquarius, right? So there's that famous song, right? This is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius, right? That song is talking about the transition from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. So there is a roughly 2,000 year or so period of time, an era, you could say, or an age, where it is, according to the theory anyways, it's ruled by the zodiac sign. The zodiac sign that is on the horizon on the morning of the spring equinox. So people have been talking about this for like crazy, because it's such a huge thing that it takes more. It's such a big transition period that it takes more than just one human lifespan to transition, right? So people are saying that we've already entered it. Some people are saying it hasn't happened yet, but because of the fact of it being such a huge transition, it's not like one singular moment. Okay, now it's past midnight on the age of Pisces, and now it is the age of Aquarius. Bam, we're done. We're here. It's not like that. So it doesn't really matter the specific date that you particularly use for that, because it's such it's a transition anyway. We're on the cusp. We're at the cusp, that transition zone. The bardo, one might say. I love that word, bardo. It's a Tibetan word, and it just means the point in between, where one thing is kind of ended and the next thing hasn't started yet. And there's lots of bardos. There's a bardo between one breath and the next. There's a bardo between one life and the next, according to the Tibetan theory. I hope you don't mind. I got some coffee, some good old Canadian Tim Hortons coffee. Yeah, I had a little bit of a headache, and so I actually got some water and some coffee, and those two things should fix me up. I don't put any sugar in it, just a bit of cream. In case you're wondering, if you ever have the opportunity to get me a coffee someday, you don't have to ask. Just put a couple creams in there and don't put any sugar. But the more famous way to get the Tim Hortons coffee in Canada, you call it a double-double. If you're not familiar with that term, it's Canadian slang for 2 cream and 2 sugar. So it's kind of a dessert coffee almost, I think. It's too sweet, way too sweet for me. But I used to drink it when I was younger. But now I just drink the cream. So anyways, you have these zodiacal ages, and each one, like I said, is roughly, just for convenience sake, let's round it to 2,000 years. I like to use December 21st, 2012 as the day that it transitioned, just because that seems to make a lot of sense to me, and that was kind of like the height of the whole apocalyptic mania that was going on around the time. First started with Y2K. People were saying Y2K, things are going to go crazy, the computers are going to all fail, and everything is going to go to hell, and planes are going to fall from the sky, you know, things like that. It was very apocalyptic, people were saying. And then that didn't happen. But there was a lot of people that were working on preventing that kind of thing as well. So there was probably a few glitches, but I don't really remember anything that was too serious that happened out of that. But this whole thing kept happening. Like, this whole thing kept going where there were jokes going around. Like, I remember I posted a joke on the internet where you had like a stamp card, and I was like, oh, I almost filled up my loyalty card, my stamp card, from all the apocalypses that I've, you know, lived through or survived. What do you get when you what do you redeem it for, you know? But I feel like that 2012 one was the big one, the big, where everybody was talking about it. It hit the zeitgeist, and it was just part of the mass consciousness. And there were even people that were talking about this long before. There's a guy, the name escapes me. It was a Spanish sounding name, but it bothers me that I can't remember it. But he was really big in talking about how we could utilize this transition to create a positive change in consciousness and mass consciousness as well. And I think that opportunity was maybe not as utilized as well as it could have been. But I do think that a lot of people became aware of a lot of esoteric concepts during that whole phase where people were talking about 2012. And what they're talking about in the Mayan long count calendar is that it wasn't just the transition from one zodiacal age to another, like a 2000 roughly year period going into the next one. It was an entire cycle of those. Like, if you think of a zodiacal age as like a great month, you could call it. Well, then the 2012, December 21st, 2012, was like the point where you start a new great year. So it was a full cycle of those mini ages. So like of course, you know, we've got 12 zodiac signs, or some people say 13. I prefer the 13. But either way, you've got your zodiacal, like, basically month. And then when you get to the beginning of it again, that's one complete cycle, right? So this 2012 thing was one complete cycle. It wasn't just a great month changing to the next great month. It was an entire great year changing, a full cycle. So the Mayans, during the peak of their civilization, they considered themselves to be in the fourth age, or the fourth creation is more what they said, the fourth creation. And so now we would be in the fifth creation, according to their way of calculating these things. So that's pretty cool because it has a V. The V is the Roman numeral for 5. And I like that. It ties into so many different things that I'm interested in. And a big part of the Lucifer sigil is a V. Actually, there's a couple V's in there if you look at it, but there's like a main one that forms the main triangle, and then there's another mini one at the bottom. Then there's an X, which is kind of like two V's put together. And yeah, anyways, it's the fifth age, you could say, the fifth creation. I like to metaphorically refer to it as the end of the world, and then spontaneously a new world occurred to take its place, and that we find ourselves in this new creation. And it's a way of changing your mindset about things, because things are different. Things are absolutely different now. I mean, and when Crowley talked about the new aeon of, I mean, he talked about like the aeon of, you know, he had these Egyptian gods that he would associate with them, but he said that in this new age that the old rites were now obsolete, you know. And I think that there's something to that. I think that the old ways still work, the old rites, they still are functional, but there is a new factor in play. And it's like adding a new element to it. And I feel like if you can kind of latch on to that, and if you can understand it, and if you can ride that wave, then you are going to be more effective in anything that you're trying to accomplish, because you're going to be utilizing these cosmic cycles, and you're going to be kind of surfing the cosmic wave and letting that wave push you forward. And if you can understand how that works, you can use that momentum to help guide you towards whatever goals that you're trying to achieve. And if you have goals that mesh well with that new factor, it's even better. You have the force of the entire universe behind you, in a sense. Now, one thing that I wanted to get into in this video, if we have time, which I think we've got time. I've got a little bit of time here. I started a little bit earlier than I usually do, so I could probably go a bit more than half an hour. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is some of the various different projects that I've been involved in the past at a high level, like leadership level I'm talking about, where I have tried to push certain concepts or certain structures that people just weren't ready for, or it wasn't compelling enough, I guess you could say, to keep people interested. And I wanted to kind of tie that into this whole new age, new era kind of concept. I feel like the new era, the new Luciferian era, the new illuminated era, whatever you want to call it, is very much about individuality in a sense, but there's this radical form of individuality, but at the same time, you can't deny the tribalism, that there's a tribalism, and within that there is individuality. So people are breaking up into smaller and smaller niche groups, identity groups, you could say, even. I mean, identity politics has just gone like crazy, like on steroids right now, and that's a symptom of this new era. And now, so some of the things that I've tried to do in the past is to try and make things a bit more open source and more self-initiation and less focused on lineage and secrets, but and less about hierarchy. But the thing is, people, that's what draws people into joining these groups, is they feel like they need somebody who can be a strong leader and that they can learn from and that they can follow and that they can get behind this person's mission and they can learn about it and they can contribute to it and they can figure things out that way. But if you try and eliminate the hierarchy, then people are like, oh, well, why don't I just do this on my own anyway? So it's hard to kind of propagate teachings in a system that has no hierarchy. I mean, it can be done, but there's challenges. There are challenges. And if you're also trying to eliminate the whole concept of lineage, well, that gets a lot of esoteric and occultists upset. People like their lineages. They feel like, okay, it's magic. You know, like if I get initiated into a lineage, then I've been empowered by that I have the power of the lineage. You know, I have the sanction from a whole sequence of powerful occultists, and they've now granted that lineage onto me, and I have accepted that, and now I have access to all this reservoir of power, you know. I think that it's completely unnecessary. You have that reservoir of power within you already, and some people just need that magic feather to hold on to convince them that they have the ability to fly. Like I'm using a Dumbo analogy here. I don't know where that came from, but you know, that tired old trope where somebody gets an item that they're told is magic or makes them extra lucky or something like that, and they believe it, and then they're able to do these amazing things, and then afterwards they lose it and they're like, oh no, I lost the thing, now I can't do my amazing stuff. And then they're told by the person who gave it to them, oh no, that was just a prop, you know, it had no magic in it, the magic was in you the entire time. You know, it's like you still need that prop to get them to do that. It's hard to get people to do the amazing thing without the prop. Once they can do it, you can take the prop away, but you can't get them to do it without that prop to begin with. Sometimes, some exceptional individuals certainly can, but most people need that prop, that crutch, you know, that placebo in a way that makes them have that confidence in themselves to begin with, and to feel like they've been empowered by an external authority. But there are also issues with that, because it can be abused, right? Like that authority can be abused by unscrupulous individuals who will, you know, become corrupt with the power that they're given. You know, they always say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, that kind of thing. I don't think that that's necessarily true, but there is something to it. You know, there is something that it changes a person, I think. And I think that if you can avoid that trap, because sometimes you get trapped into it and then you believe that you need that prop, and then the person's like, oh yeah, you need that prop, and I'm the one that can keep you supplied with that prop, you know. Like often in the old school esoteric orders, you would have an oath that you would have to pledge to the order, that if you were to ever divulge the secrets of the order, or if you were ever to utilize the knowledge that you've been given from the order for selfish purposes, or something along those lines, that your connection with the egregore of the order, the reservoir of power that the order is embodying, that you no longer have access to that, and that all of your magical tools will turn on you, and that sort of thing. And you have to give an oath to say, yes, I agree, blah, 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 right? And then now you're in this position where you've been given this prop that allows you to kind of access these levels of power within yourself that you didn't realize that you had access to until you were given that prop. And then somebody, a structure that is now saying, yeah, you need this prop and you need us to continue to have access to the prop. I don't know if I'm taking this analogy too far, but basically you can become addicted in a sense to that feeling of being part of something greater that allows you to access abilities that you don't realize you already have the access to. It's like, okay, so for example, you know how in the movie Dumbo, the classic one, I didn't see the remake, he gets this feather and he holds it in his trunk, and then he's able to fly, right? Well, what if the person who gave it to him, I don't remember who it was, but the person who gave it to him, what if they said, yeah, okay, well, you can only, you know, if you ever cross me, I'll take that feather back, you know, and I'm the only one who has access to these feathers. If you ever damage that feather, you come to me and you get a new one. But, you know, if you ever cross me, there goes your feather. You know, you're not going to have access to that feather anymore. Instead of saying, the power was within you the entire time, you know. That's what should have happened, and what did happen in the movie, right? But what if they had said, no, you need that feather, and I'm the one that can provide that feather for you to be able to fly. It's not you, it's that feather. you know? That's old school esoteric orders. That's how they operate. They give you this feather, and then you're like, oh, I have these abilities now. I have this access to this reservoir of occult power. And if I ever break my oath, then I'll lose that, you know. But really, it's just you've been introduced to a part of yourself and been told that it's something else. So that's the paradox of trying to get somebody to come into their own power without kind of taking the power from them in the first place. Do you get what I'm talking about? We have Christine says hello from the Blue Mountain, Washington. I believe WA is Washington, I believe, right? Blue Mountains, the Blue Mountains. Would those be the Rocky Mountains? Part of the Rocky Mountain range, perhaps? Yeah, well, I'm glad that you could stop in for this Esoteric Insomniac live stream. So I'm talking about the new way, the new era, where there's this individuality, but people are still clinging to the old ways where you were, you know, subjected to a hierarchy, and that you had to give oaths of secrecy and such. Whereas in the new way, you have the open source movement, where anybody with access to the knowledge is able to utilize it for whatever they want to use it for. And if you were to apply this to initiation, let's say, traditionally, secrecy was actually one of the draws, was one of the reasons people would join an esoteric order in the first place. So if all of your materials are public domain, you know, in a sense, not exactly public domain, but might as well say roughly accessible to the public, and open source, where you don't need permission to utilize it, you just take it and run with it. That's diametrically opposed to the old ways of the old school esoteric orders, where if you wanted to open up a lodge and operate using certain rituals, you had to get permission from the established hierarchy that has claimed ownership of those rights. You know, you can't just open up a Masonic temple and expect people to take you seriously. You know, like you can be like, yeah, I'm just going to open up my own Masonic temple. You know, you could. You know, you could, but people will be like, well, then why would I join yours, which is just one group in, you know, isolated group, when I could join this large connected organization, you know, with all these resources that they have available to them? Well, one reason might be that you don't necessarily have to give the oath of secrecy. You know, you're not bound by some obligation to an organization, and you're not saying that you're going to suffer some various different consequences if you break the rules of this organization. You know, that might be one reason why so one of the things that that I got involved with early on in my esoteric career, relatively early, you know, it was after I had been involved with a few different groups. I mean, I had been a part of several groups, but when I was starting to kind of branch off and I wanted to get into something explicitly Luciferian and not behind the scenes Luciferian, and most people didn't realize it was, which I had been in a few of those groups, which I've talked about on this channel before. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out some of my older videos on that, like Luciferian connection to Freemasonry, and some of the experiences that I had with like Gnosticism and the Golden Dawn and things like that. I've got some videos where I go in depth of some of those things, but and the OTO, but there was a Masonic order that I was involved with, which was secretly Luciferian at the top levels, and most people didn't know. And there was even Christians in the group that didn't know about it, and it just felt abusive to me. It felt like it's deceptive. You're using these people to further your own objectives, and they don't even realize what they're supporting. And I didn't like that, and I wanted things to be out in the open. I wanted to be part of a Luciferian group. So I ended up joining the Ordo Luciferi. And I was going to just start one. But then I was like, you know what? Why reinvent the wheel? Let me see if there's something out there that's close enough to what I was thinking of doing, and just join that and be part of that, And so I did. And I thought it was really cool, and it had a great structure set up. But once I got really involved with it, I realized that it was actually just, it was all talk. I kept trying to activate it into a real esoteric order, but I came across all kinds of resistance. People just were happy with it being an online discussion group that had titles. People had titles like, I'm this degree and I'm that degree and I'm this and that, right? And I tried to make it operative. I kept trying to like have like rituals and people getting together and doing these ceremonies and forming groups in the real world, and not just throwing their title around and abusing the new people joining. And I ended up calling that out at one point. I said, you know what, this is bullshit. Christine says Southeast Washington, all talk, no show. I'm not sure what that last part is referring to, but maybe about what I was talking about, the Ordo Luciferi, all talk, no show. And yeah, it definitely was a lot of people that, there was knowledgeable people for sure. And I really enjoyed my interactions with a lot of people that were involved with that. But when it came down to it, oh, thank you, Dave. Dave just sent me a super chat of $2. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That helps support what I do here. Christine says what you were talking about. Okay, that's what I thought. So I just kind of called it out. I said, you know what? These titles, these degrees that we've all been, playing around with, they mean nothing. What does it really mean? Like, and we're new people come in and then they get, bullied until they can, to see if they're gonna stand up for themselves or not. It was just a big game, and nobody was willing to really kind of put it into practice, like in the real world. And so I just kind of called it out. I denounced, I was one of the highest ranking members in the order at the time, and the person who had started the whole thing had been missing in action for over a year. And we had no idea if he was ever coming back or anything, right? And I just was like, you know what? It's done. It's, this is all BS, I denounce any titles that I ever had. My degree is meaningless, and this is why. And I said the whole thing, and basically everybody followed suit, and they all just were like, yeah, I'm. And then they started coming up with their own ridiculous degrees and titles for fun, and we're all kind of mocking it, and it just kind of collapsed. And then there were a whole bunch of people that were like, you know what, I actually miss that structure. Even though it was theoretical and it wasn't like fully operative, it was still kind of a way for me to gauge my own progress, because there were, you know, I could kind of look at it and I could say, okay, well, where do I think I am in that process? And there was enough support that I basically was like, okay, well, let's reform it, and let's try and do something cool with this. And so I was like, okay, I'll, you know, take the reins if that's cool with everyone. And I wrote a self-initiation ritual that could be used by people in the real world. They could do this in their own home. And I tried to kind of make things more open source, and but still with that kind of basic structure behind it, but that people could kind of gauge for themselves. And that's kind of even where it is now still. But there's an online lodge that's housed within the Luciferian Research Society. So if you go to luciferianresearch.org and join there is a group within that is called the Ordo Luciferi Working Group. And that's something that I actually started before the whole thing collapsed, to try and get people actually doing some work in the real world, like doing some of this stuff for real. And so I was like, you know what, let's just turn that into an online lodge if people want to do this. And so degrees were granted and things like that in recognition for certain work. You know, certain assignments were given, things like that. Percussive Flame says, hello, my friend. Glad to see you up and on live. Well, thank you for joining us here tonight on this live stream. I have some more of my coffee. So I've been kind of rambling a bit. I don't really have a heck of a lot more time left, but that's kind of been the main challenge that I've had in a lot of the different esoteric order projects that I've kind of been working with. Like the Ziggurat of Enki is fully open source, where you can actually get the materials, everything you need to start a lodge yourself, a real live lodge of the Ziggurat of Enki, a left-hand path esoteric order of the new Luciferian era, where it's open source, so you can actually obtain the materials and you don't need permission from anybody to utilize them. You don't need to request a charter to start a lodge. Actually, you can go to jeremycrow.com, sign up to my newsletter. You just give your email address and sign up to my newsletter. I haven't really been putting them out lately, but I do intend to get back to that very soon. But what will happen is when you join and you verify your email address, you'll get a link to download the ebook for the first degree, the grade book for the first degree of the Ziggurat of Enki. And it has everything you need to start a lodge, a real esoteric lodge of the Ziggurat of Enki, without having to get permission from anybody. All you need are 5 people, including yourself, to perform the ritual. So a lot of people are like, oh, that's a tall order. But I mean, to get 5 people isn't really that hard if you are keen, you know. If you're motivated, it's not very hard at all. But yeah, you can do that. So that was one project that I'd started, and it's really hard to get traction for something that doesn't have the allure of secrets, that I'm going to get all these secrets when I join. And there was a joke, I can't remember who made the joke, maybe it was Crowley, but they said that they went through this initiation ceremony for the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, back in the day, even like the original, or maybe it was the Stella Matutina, one of the kind of spin-off groups after the initial one collapsed. But either way, one of the old school Golden Dawn lodges, and they were initiated into it, and they went through this solemn, elaborate ceremony, and they had a sword pressed against the back of their neck, and they're bowed down in front of an altar, and in front of all these robed figures, and they have to recite this death oath, basically, to keep the secrets, the sacred secrets, safe of the order. And all these horrible things will happen to you if you ever divulge these secrets. And then once they get through that, they're handed what the secrets are. It's the Hebrew alphabet. And they're like, what the fuck is this? I'm not allowed to talk about the fucking Hebrew alphabet, like that's the big secret. Like, but it got people to join, right? The allure of that, the mystique, and how many people have joined Freemasonry to find out the secrets, to find out if it really is this diabolical, conspiratorial, practically omnipotent group of a network of powerful, influential individuals. How many people have joined Freemasonry because of all the conspiracy theories about them? And they're like, oh, I want to know if it's real. What are all these secrets that they're keeping? What is it? How many people have joined because of that? So without that allure, like how many people are willing to put in the effort to do that, right? So that's another challenge that I've had, trying to get some of these open source, non-permission based esoteric structures out there that people would actually implement and get together and actually perform these rituals and experience them and utilize them for various purposes, and then take the formula from those rituals and craft their own ceremonies for themselves. And that's the vision I have for a lot of these projects that I'm doing, but it's hard to get people to feel like they've got the authority to do it. They've got the authority in them, they've got the power in themselves without somebody granting them, somebody coming in and laying their hands on them and saying, you now have the lineage, and here's the stamp, and I've signed it with my esoteric gnomon, and the little symbol with the 3 dots on it, and now you have a certificate here, the charter to start your own lodge, and here are the modes of recognition that nobody else can know. The secret handshake and the word of the password, and without the allure of all these secrets, if you can read the ritual beforehand, it's not a lot of people feel like, oh well, I read it, yeah, it's cool, I read it. Whereas it's not the same thing as experiencing it. It's completely different, not completely different. There's something you get from reading it, of course, but it doesn't, it reduces the motivation. This is human nature, right? That I've kind of struggled against, and I've tried to kind of figure out, well, what kind of compromise is there? What kind of props? What about these things do I need to utilize to get people motivated enough to actually do these things. And then later I can say, you don't need that feather to fly, Dumbo. You know, you had the power within you the entire time, you know, where I can do that. You know, maybe I should just give people that feather and say, this is a magic feather that lets you fly. And then later, once they do start to fly, then being like, you didn't need that feather. So that's kind of where I've come to with this kind of a post-mortem of some of these projects that I've put out there in the world that never really caught on, never really kind of picked up enough momentum to really become like a movement. You know, like there have been projects that I've done that have been very successful, but a lot of those involve some form of formal hierarchy. And you know, it kind of just, there's something that rubs me the wrong way about it. But maybe I got to do it. Maybe I got to just bite the bullet and utilize some of these what do they call, you know, tricks, I guess you could call it, really. Utilize some of these psychological mechanisms, you know, tug on human nature, these irresistible things that motivate people. You know, maybe I gotta utilize those to get people into it and do the things, and then I can pull the rug out under them and be like, you know, actually there's this really cool story that I heard about, and I can't remember where it was from, but this the idea was that, you know, an individual goes up through all these levels of an esoteric order, and they work their way up, and then they get all the way up to the top levels, and then at the peak, when they're hitting that last degree, where they have the penultimate degree, you know, they enter into the sanctum sanctorum, the holy of holies, with the high priest, and they're brought in private, and then at the pinnacle, at the climax of the ceremony, the high priest whispers in their ear, "There is no God." and then they're like, "Oh," you know, you know, maybe I got to do something like that. You know, that's kind of where I'm going with this now at this point, because of kind of examining why some of the different projects that I was involved with failed, and why some of these not exactly failed, but why they never caught fire to the level that some of the other projects that I've done have. You know, like the Greater Church of Lucifer, that was immensely popular, you know. That was huge, but it had a very formal hierarchy. And there were some very old school ways of going about things that we were doing with that. And people loved it, you know, like it's something that people crave, you know, but I don't think that it helps them ultimately in the end, because really it's just another form of control that you're kind of caught up in. And, you know, I need to figure out a balance between these, where you use some of these psychological mechanisms to get them into it, and then once they're doing it, then tell them, you know, you didn't need that, really. Like, you don't need it now, you know, at least. Maybe you needed it to get yourself to that point, but you don't need it anymore. I think that that's kind of where I'm going with this now. So the project that I'm working on now incorporates a lot of the structures and teachings that have been part of some of these other things that I've had going on, that I've tried to launch, but I think I'm going to have a bit more of those old school mechanisms as part of it to get people into it, at least to begin with, and then later you can wean them off of some of these things, or you can maybe there's enough of a balance there where there's enough of that to keep them going, but not so much that they get trapped into it. So I gotta go now, guys. Thank you so much for everybody who stopped in. Christine said, you have the keys to philosophy. I think you're onto something about psychology. Yeah. Like I've had so much experience with these groups, very old school ones, very new era, like open source, non-permission based ones that, and some of them not as much as ones that are blended in between. So I think that's where I'm going to go next, is try and utilize some of these psychological mechanisms but not so much that it traps people into these structures. So Dave says, thanks for giving your word and time. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for being a sounding board, all of you, and I appreciate everybody here. And Dave, thanks for that super chat. I really appreciate that as well. Momo Dash says, thank you too. These car videos are therapeutic in a way. Yeah, for me as well. It's a way for me to kind of just ramble on about a subject that I feel very passionate about. And thank you all very much for being here and part of this. And anybody who's watching this as an archive stream later on, please leave your comments below and tell me what you think about this. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And Miss B popped in, say hi. Well, we're just about to end, but of course in just a few minutes this will be available as an archive as well. So again, thank you so much for everybody. I really appreciate you and the community that we're forming here. And until next time, everyone. Oh, the girl that likes roses says hi, Jeremy. Hi. Until next time, everyone, stay lucid.